Hey YouTube, Hito here, and also Remy, he's a cat. And I've been bringing you a climber's guide to Sirius. Now when I say climber's guide, it's because really the intended audience of this guide are people in Battlerite who are looking for like a main to play to kind of work up the ranks, because I see a lot of people asking that question, and I think that Sirius is actually a really good answer. So I'm going to be kind of making the case for him and giving you a lot on some of his abilities. Couple of quick disclaimers. First off, I'm a diamond level player, so I don't guarantee any of this advice in Champion League. And this is during Season 4, Secrets of the Forest, so if you're watching this in a later season, I mean, hopefully most of it is still good, but be increasingly skeptical the more seasons you are away from Season 4. So, why, meow, is Sirius a good champ to kind of grind ranking with? Well, one reason, and this is the biggest one, is that as a sort of melee support, he has a lot of flexibility game to game for what role he plays. You can play him basically almost as a second DPS who just drops a little bit of healing, or in matches when they have no healing and you're just trying to stall out, you can play him as kind of really conservative, hang out in the back kind of guy. There's also kind of relatedly, in 2's queue especially, it's really hard to make a bad team with Sirius. You can kind of team up with anybody because he's so flexible, and you'll have a pretty good comp on your hands. So that's another nice thing, is you don't really get comp screwed the way in 2v2 you can with some other champs. Of course, comp screwing is less of a problem than 3v3, but if you're trying to grind ranking, 2v2 is a lot better than 3v3 because you're 50% of your team instead of 33%. So the matches are pretty much always under your control, especially because Sirius is relatively good in 2v1. So in lower rankings, like I think at the start of the season when it made me go all the way back up instead of seeding me from the beginning, I think I dropped maybe 2 games from contender to plat, because yeah, you can just kind of, if you're way better than both your opponents as Sirius, you can do a pretty good job. I mean, that's a lot of Battlerite heroes, to be fair. Yeah, so those are 2. Another thing about Sirius, he's mechanically pretty undemanding. He's not like a Rook or a Freya where you kind of really have to time stuff at the right time. He's pretty forgiving as a champion, so it's a lot more just about getting your game sense up and managing cooldowns and getting good counter discipline. Kind of the fundamentals of Battlerite, but there's not a lot of Sirius specific combos you've got to work at. Now, what are his weaknesses? Because I've been talking up his strengths. His biggest weakness is Sirius has a lot of trouble initiating fights. So as Sirius, you really want your teammates to be initiating the fights for you, and then you kind of support them and you jump in and join them. That's not to say they do the work. A lot of times you'll do more damage as your teammates than your teammates rather as Sirius, but you still need them to be the first ones to kind of get the fight going. I mean, petrify, for example, is a great secondary crowd control, but you don't really initiate with petrify that often unless your opponent messed up somehow. So in a match where everyone is ranged but Sirius has a really hard time. If everyone wants to play keep away, then Sirius has a really hard time being the first one to start it. Another problem with Sirius is he's quite reliant on landing his counter to be safe and to have mobility. So when your opponent has good counter discipline, it's really easy to kind of dogpile and just murder Sirius if you miss a counter. Yeah, and he also, it just exacerbates the kiting problem if he doesn't land them. And then finally, one thing I just kind of want to note is that when I say that, oh, Sirius is mechanically pretty easy, so it's just about game knowledge, that can almost be a negative if you're not careful. Because if you have trouble leveling up in these matches because you do your combos wrong, you're like, oh, I should do the combos correctly. Okay, I got it. Whereas if you lose because your game knowledge was wrong, let's say as Sirius, this was a matchup where you needed to kind of go in and fight and probably die. Like, you need to kind of draw the aggro because your teammate's like a Jade, you guys got no good initiate. It's like, fine, I'm not a good initiator, but I'm just going to come in with my war face and I'm going to fight and I'm going to die, but in the process buy you enough time to win for me, right? That's what you should kind of do. Well, let's say you play it conservatively, you read the game knowledge wrong. Well, then you guys kind of both just get stomped and you might leave thinking, oh, this Jade is so bad, even though it was you who made the wrong read. So that's just something to watch out for, that if you're losing matches, you should always assume before blaming your teammates, well, did I read the situation wrong? Because as Sirius, what I should be doing match to match varies a lot more than most champs, and that's the thing that makes him good for leveling up because he has that flexibility. But it means that if you read it wrong, it's not necessarily obvious that's what you've done. So, I mean, yeah, sometimes your teammates are going to be the reason you lose, but always kind of assume you read the situation wrong first and try to adapt based on that. So now we're going to go into his abilities. I'm not going to totally describe what all of them do because I tried a version of this guide to doing that and it was like 90 minutes long, so whoops. But we're going to kind of go through the very big things, and the first thing is Crescent Strike. Because the very important thing to know is when it's charged, it does 22 damage, which is a lot. But the weaken is way more important. This is the single most important thing in Sirius's kit, and it's the thing that opponents will most frequently misplay around. So a 50% weaken over 2.5 seconds. What that means is because you're a healer, and you heal for 14 health, if you hit someone, it's really hard for them to do 28 damage in the time it takes you to heal. So if you hit someone with that weaken, you can stand toe-to-toe with basically anybody for those 2.5 seconds. And that's a big part of what makes him a melee, because his follow-up hits are only 8, which aren't much damage, but your opponents are doing half damage. So you're still probably doing more than them, even if you're just swinging at them for 8. So the weaken is insanely important, and you just need to be really careful about not wasting your outs disengaging when your opponent is weakened. Like, when your opponent is weakened, you are the king of the fight, and they have to run from you. And if they don't, just, either sit and whack at them, or just sit and heal yourself, but you can tank them out when that happens. You need to not be afraid of a weakened opponent. Heal, pretty easy. One thing to note is it does go over walls, which a lot of heals don't. So that can be pretty useful, especially because also your E goes over walls. So if your space is a few seconds from being up, you can contribute to a fight pretty well over the wall. Space, self-explanatory, damage and healing. Sunrise is counter, so he has a lot of power budget in his counter. I think Sirius is the best counter in the game because Sirius and Varesh have two really powerful counters because they're non-deterministic. You get to choose where you go, which is a lot more powerful than like Shifu. Yeah, Kunju is good, but if your opponent procs the Kunju, they know where you're going to show up, right? If your opponent hits Freya's staticky thing, they know what just happened to them. Whereas you get that moment of uncertainty with Sunrise, where you can, go in and engage, or you can disengage. Although I will tell you, most of the time you should be using Sunrise to engage, right? Because, like I said, when you've got that weaken, you're the king of the fight. You should be using Sunrise to go up to someone. You're gonna left click, maybe wait a second if you think they're gonna counter as soon as they see you appear. But Sunrise, then hit somebody, and then heal yourself or hit them or whatever you want. That's the main best thing to do Sunrise for. Sometimes you run to an ally to heal them for 12 and defend them. Sometimes you just need to get far away from an enemy or get to the orb or something. But the first thing you should always be looking for with Sunrise is who can I engage on with this. So yeah, it's insanely strong. And yeah. Now, like I said, because a lot of his power budget isn't his counter and you're screwed if you miss it, here are a couple of tips to help you land counters. And the first pertains to weaken, like I was mentioning earlier. So if you weaken somebody, but they want to sit and fight you, even through the weaken, because maybe they've kind of got nothing better to do, they're like, well, at least I'll damage him somewhat, even if it's only half. It's a lot easier to land a counter if you wait till you guys are kind of in a back and forth fight and you counter in the middle of it. Because when they're walking up, approaching you, waiting to get the first hit, that's when opponents are going to be most sensitive to counters. If they're already in a rhythm, they've already, you've started hitting back and forth, generally speaking, it's a lot easier to counter in the middle of that kind of fight. So that's one thing that will help you land a lot of Sunrises. Another is just when you ulti. So the way Sirius ulti works, because it's got a really dramatic self-heal, and it heals and does lots of damage, he's disproportionate in these situations where you're ulting one enemy, and the enemy's buddy is behind you hitting you, but they don't think you're going to cancel out of it. Because you're still getting a lot of value, even just self-healing, let alone self-healing plus hitting orb, self-healing plus hitting other enemy, self-healing plus hitting ally. In any of those situations, they kind of still feel like you're going to beam to duration. So generally speaking, it's a free counter. If you interrupt your own astral beam near the end with a Sunrise, usually your opponents are going to hit that Sunrise. Because it's so compelling to think that, oh, of course he's going to keep doing the astral beam. That it's really hard for them to kind of start hitting you when you're doing the beam and then stop as you counter. So it's really good to counter as you near the end of an astral beam. Okay. Lunar Strike. This is kind of the most polarizing Sirius killed. It makes some people really tilted, but it's honestly, like, I mean, it's the longest non-ulti CC in the game, but it's still not too strong. A lot of champs can get out of it, even if they do. I mean, the shield is 18, which is pretty significant. Now, this really does vary wildly between matchups, whether this is going to be a major thing that controls your enemies, or just kind of like a little tool to get them off your back for a couple of seconds by doing it at your feet. So I'm not going to go work through the list of every champion and say, like, who's good against Petrify and who's not. Because, I mean, mostly you can tell, right? The more short mobilities they have or short iframes they have, the better they are. I'm just going to mention a few specific matchups that you might not intuit right away if you're new to the game. First is at Varesh, because he's got absolutely nothing that gets out of Petrify except his R. At the start of the game, or immediately after he does an ulti that doesn't get him the orb, when he doesn't have energy to do his R, then it's like a free Petrify. So really good to Petrify Varesh early. Assuming he's dismounted, of course. If he's mounted at the very, very beginning, then you can't Petrify a guy who's mounted, right? Another important one is Lucy. So you may think, like Varesh, she can only get out with her R, but because her Clarity Potion removes debuffs and it has a hang time in the air, a good Lucy can see the circle below her and throw the Clarity Potion right before she gets petrified. So she gets petrified, then it lands and knocks her out right away. So a good Lucy is going to be harder to petrify than you might suspect. That being said, the timing is a bit tricky, so if you're in a low elo, go ahead and try it, see if you can get her, or just wait for her to use Clarity on something else. But keep that in mind that she can Clarity herself because of the air time. And then another important one is just that Rook and Freya have their standing in place iframes where they pop up in the air for a second and then come right back down. And that's just a bit more dangerous than your average ways to get out. Because normally if you're getting attacked and you do this, right? Like, yeah, Croak can get out of it by doing his little frog dash to the side. That still means he's not hitting you for a second. Ashka can Molten Fist, he's still not hitting you for a second. But if Croak or Freya are like fighting you, you've blown your counter and you're in a duel, and you do the Petri at your feet, they can both dodge the Petrify, but still be right next to you fighting you. So that's something to really watch out for, is that if possible, you really like to save Petrify when their hops are gone. Because if they use their spaces to get out of it, at least they're using their spaces to get away from you, which, you know, might be what you want. But the hop in place out of Petrify is kind of the worst of both worlds. Although conversely, if you do this, and you know that Rook has used his space, but not his, right click, then it can be kind of a free counter a lot of the time. If he's not careful, because he's gonna need it for the jump, and unless he's thinking, I'm gonna turn away and hit nothing, a lot of times you can catch him out with the counter. At least the first time in a fight, and then they might get wise to it. His R, Prismatic Strike. Prismatic Strike is really good. Use the hell out of this skill, because, I mean, Sirius is very low mobility and very low crowd control, so this fixes both. The main advice I have for this is just be very liberal with it. Don't be afraid to use it just to grab the orb. Don't be afraid to use it just to get out of like an Ashka Volcano. Anytime you need the mobility or the damage or the crowd control, just pop this bad boy. It's so strong. His ulti, it's very, very good. It takes a bit of setup relative to other ultis, but because it's so strong when used optimally, it's fine to sit on the energy to use ultimate for 5-10 seconds and wait for a really good one. It's not one of those ones where you try to just use it as soon as it's up. And Sirius can get energy pretty quickly, so you don't need to worry so much about that. One thing, if you flunked out of your high school geometry class, so remember, it's a line, and Sirius's turn speed is quite slower when he's ulting, right? And so remember, what that means is that the farther along on the beam you are, the faster it spins, because he goes at an angle, and the beam needs to move at this whole angle all at once. And the part next to him, that corresponds to a very low amount of movement, and the parts near the end, that corresponds to a high amount of movement. And that's important because your opponents are trying to move out of this. So you want to try to be beaming people with like the back half, like the farther half of the beam, because that part is much faster. Whereas if you try to beam at close range, they just need to walk a little bit around you, and then that slower turn radius really affects you. Whereas the farther they are, now of course it's a balance, because if you do it at the very farthest range, then they're just going to walk out of it. So right around the midpoint is where you like to try to get people. And because it's got such a strong self-heal, it's kind of fine to just say, I'm going to beam and for the first half of its duration, then you're going to walk out. I mean, that's still a lot of damage. And crucially, because Sirius has trouble with high amounts of burst damage, so he's got, the Crescent Strike does 22, you hit him again, it's 30. Maybe you spaced into that fight for 10. Doing that kind of 40-ish amount of damage, Sirius can do that pretty well. If you need to do more than that, because you're against like a Pearl Raygon kind of comp that focuses on just not losing recovery health, you really do need Beam. So sometimes you're going to have these matches that you sit and you wait for Beam, even though you could get a good Prismatic Strike off or whatever. Because in a lot of matchups, especially when you're 2v1, it's like Beam is your only hope. If you need to deal a lot of damage all at once to get past recovery health, sometimes you have no recourse but to just try to land a Beam. Even if your chance isn't too good to land it, if there's no other option, you'll just need to hope that you can get the good Beam off. One other tip about Petrify I forgot to mention. One trick that can be pretty useful with Sirius is you petrify, and then you say, yeah, you've got the shield, but even so, right before Petri goes off, I'm going to hit the weaken. In that case, it was actually right after. If you're against like a counter champion, and they're really kind of sitting and hitting you, and you petrify, but you're still kind of next to them, then you can say, instead of focusing on the damage, I just want to guarantee the weaken hits, and you just do it like 1 millisecond before they get out of the petrify. So it's like, whoop, there's no way they could have countered that weaken, and yeah, you lost the burst damage, but it still means there's 2.5 seconds where they're weakened, and a lot of times that can be enough. So sometimes you will want to use your charged Crescent Strike on someone right before they come out of Petrify instead of right after, if you think they're mashing their counter as soon as they get out. That's a good tip. His EX left click is this big, slow range attack. It's his only range attack, he has to pay for it. Since it has such an obvious animation because it turns purple right away, it can be a decent one to bait. So make sure that you've got your key set up such that you can do an EX and then a cancel, one after the other. I have them on the 2 mouse buttons on my thumb. Just whatever you do, make sure that this is comfortable for you to do. Having said that, a lot of people just forget about this at lower rankings, and you don't really need to cancel it, you just use it, and then they never like dodge it or counter it or anything the first time you use it in a match, because they just kind of, oh yeah, I forgot Sirius had range. Stupid, but works a lot, and up to gold or so. But then as you get further on, you can also use this for the counter. And you do save the energy as long as you cancel it in time. Sorry, use it for the cancel, so I meant not use it for the counter. So, I mean, you'll know when you need to use it because it's so slow and obvious and bad. If you think you need to use it, you're probably right. Because it doesn't really, you wouldn't want to use this ever. You only use it when you have to, right? And then his other EX, the Celestial Rift, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't use it that much. Which is not to say that it's bad, it just kind of takes a lot of tracking in a fight to let, this will get a good heal on an ally, and my weapon is far away from getting charged, and it's going to do, good damage to the enemy. I'll use it to secure the orb when I don't have a weapon charge, and I kind of see, I got to get this orb right now. It's hard for me to kind of keep track of when to be good against enemies. So use it if it feels right, but what I'll tell you is you don't need to lean really heavily on it to get the diamond. That's what I can say. Maybe it turns out I'll find a lot more situations where it's good and that gets me to champ, but at any rate, it's certainly not necessary to Sirius's kit in the same way that something like Croak's Deceit is, where if you don't use that EX stealth, you are really not that good at Croak at all. So yeah, those are just kind of some helpful tips on his abilities. Now we're going to get to the meat of this, which is the Battlerites, because, like I said, he's a very flexible champ, and a large part of that is because of his Battlerites, so it's very important that you adapt. There is no one true Sirius build. You need to be very flexible depending on the situation. So we're going to get really in detail about all of his Battlerites. Sunbath is really strong. And whenever you land a charged auto, your next heal will echo, and the first one echoes at full health, and the second at half health. These don't give you energy, but they really don't need to, because just the healing is so sick. So let me put in perspective how strong Sunbath is, okay? I'm fighting Freya. She gets static on me, but I land the charged M1 and weaken her. She ults me. I right-click at my feet. they cancel out. Because she does 60 damage with that ult, Weaken makes it 30 damage, and one Sunbath right click, if you stand for all 3 of them, heals 30 health. Oh yeah, I said full strength, but technically 1 is 14, 1 is 12. Wow, right? That is ridiculous. Like, you could just tank out an ulti. I had a really memorable game where there was a Raigon, and I hit him right before he did Wrath of the Tiger, and I just did his ult. Didn't matter at all. So I think Sunbath, you should always take it if there's at least 2 other melees in the game, because that means that the fights are going to be happening at this melee range that you can do this and stay. And that's a pretty forgiving circle, so you can do a lot of like land the EX left click and then kite in place. So as long as there's 2 other melees between the teams, because if my teammate is melee, then it's great. He gets in the fight and I do the Sunbath at their feet and they are happy. If my teammate is ranged but both enemies are melee, then still probably they're going to gang up on me, and then I can use the Sunbath to just kite them out. Because it pairs really well with what I mentioned earlier, where when your opponent is weakened, you don't need to run, you can stand and fight. So if your opponent is weakened and then you Sunbath, then you've got 30 passive healing coming in. Like, you need to do the first one, but then I suppose a better way to phrase this, 18 more healing coming after you do a right click. And your opponent needs to do 36 damage to match that 18, which they're really hard to do in that short time span. So you can just sit and just whack them with your left clicks. You don't care, because they're not going to meet you in a fight. Lunatic is one where after you do an E, for a short while after, you can redo a smaller one. Most of the time you just use it in the same spot you did your first one. Sometimes you'll like do this, draw a space, and then E at the new spot. A lot of times you just use it to double the duration of it. So most of the time this is just a force multiplier on Lunatic. Like in the matches where Lunar Strike is good, that's when you take Lunar Strike and make it even better. If it wasn't going to be that good, then this isn't going to be that good either. So just use it when the enemies are ones who are going to get caught by it a lot. One interesting thing, though, is I mentioned earlier that Rook and Freya are kind of the most dangerous ways to get out of this, because they can do it whilst remaining in place and remaining fighting you. But if you do this and then this, well, if Freya or Rook did a jump to dodge the first one, then they're still in range for the second one. So Lunar Strike can kind of be... Even if your opponent is good at dodging Lunar Strike, if they're doing it, using Freya or Rook's standing in place iframes, then Lunatic can be really good even if Lunar Strike isn't, because it sort of is much easier to land in the second one because they've remained in place. Of course, having said that, Sunbath is also really good into Freya and Rook, and what I find is the higher up I climb in the rankings, I just tend to take Sunbath, even though Lunatic is pretty good also into Freya and Rook, because they're just kind of the more respectful choice. Just Sunbath, just so I know that I can stand toe-to-toe in long melee fights. But especially in lower leagues, Lunatic, you can get lots and lots of value for it, because you can just petrify people for 7 seconds, and it's ridiculous. And then Illumination, most of the time this is just the default, like I take this if the other 2 are bad. Like if you're in a situation where only one other person is melee and you can't really land good Lunatics, then sure, take Illumination. It's just kind of free value, give you a bit of extra damage and healing for 3 seconds. The one time you would positively want to take Illumination, and not just take it because the other 2 aren't strong, is again those Pearl Raigon comps where you have a lot of trouble bursting through recovery health. If you need to be sort of the primary damage, and you do lots of damage all at once, then this 20% can make a big difference, because remember, this is 22 damage, so it makes it instantly 26 when you come out of a counter, and then it gives you a few other strong hits that will really help you burst people down. Especially if you use Illumination instead of doing a left click, you actually ulti, then that 20% on the ulti is pretty good. It's the most single damage Sirius can possibly bring in a 2-second span is having Illumination proc and then doing an Astral Beam. So if you really, really need to do that, take Illumination. Most of the time, you're going to want Sunbath, I'd say. But if you're in a situation where you anticipate landing lots of Petrifies, take Lunatic. And if you need to burst through recovery health, or just if the other 2 aren't that strong, that's when you go for Illumination. Tier 2. I think Sunwell is Sirius' single best Battlerite. It makes your space heal 8 more, which is already kind of nice. But the big thing is that the cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds. Now, his cooldown in the first place is only 9. So this is almost half of the cooldown. And remember, mobility, that's where all of Sirius's problems come from, is that he's not really mobile, so it's easy to kite him, right? So having half again as fast Sunwell, Celestial Spet's really, really strong. Having said that, you really kind of need to do this with a melee ally or otherwise close range ally. Because otherwise, right, if your Jade is using all her CDs to run away from fights, then a lot of times you need to be kind of punishing your enemies as they chase your Jade by fighting them. And it's hard to time it so that you get to your Jade and then she gets out, if you see what I mean. So you kind of want to use this on allies who plans to stand and fight, not enemies who are allies who are constantly kiting, because then they kind of kite your Sunwell at the same time, if you see what I mean. On a similar vein, don't take this with Croak, because Croak has lots of tiny little dashes, and what you'll find is he's good at dodging enemies, he's also good at dodging friendship, and it's quite unfortunate. Sunscreen, this is actually a lot like Illumination. It was just kind of like a default value thing, just like, oh, 12-second shield, sure. If your ally is bad, but you are good, like you're in a low elo, where you anticipate, like, my ally's going to die early, but I think I can win the 2v1, this is really good for the 2v1, or just when you can't trust your friends in general. And then Celestial Cycle is an interesting one, because it gives you 50% weapon charge when you land Prismatic Strike, which gives you a really kind of good damage over a few seconds, because you can land your empowered left click, and then you can do the Prismatic, hit him a few more, and then do another one. Having said that, what I find is a lot of times with Sirius, you start a fight with Prismatic, you do the weaken, and then sometime during the weaken, like I said, those are some of the best times to land a Sunrise. And since Sunrise recharges your weapon, that makes this totally irrelevant. So you shouldn't take Celestial Cycle unless you think you're going to be doing Prismatic Strike and then not using counter for 4 seconds, right? That's what it takes. You need to use that second swing, that second left click, before you do another counter. And it's kind of hard to have these situations where you're going to R, left click, sit and fight them for hither and yon. Or sorry, it's not even that. It needs to be like empowered left click, and then they get away, and then you are back, and then you get another one without ever needing the counter. It does happen, but be careful. When you take this, be critical about when you're actually landing the counter or not. So, in conclusion, Sunwell, whenever you have an ally that can support it. If you don't have an ally that can support it, default to Sunscreen. But, you know, if you're chasing, especially against something like a Taya, if you're in one of those unfortunate situations where you are chasing a lot, then take this. That's what I say is, Sirius doesn't like to be in the situations where this is good, but you'll kind of know if it's like, ah, crap, I need to be starting all the fights. That's when you take Celestial Cycle, I would say. Tier 3 is really cool because you have to choose a power-up for his empowered left click, and you just choose what it is. The root, I find, gets really overvalued by people. I think that people take the root way too much. Because, like, ultimately, when you root them, they're already weakened. So, they already kind of, if they've got like a spacebar ability that makes them immaterial or whatever, they already are thinking they want to use that. I don't know, just the situations where after you land that, they're trying to kind of walk away slowly, I find are pretty limited to begin with. It's pretty good into like Taya and Croak. Again, in those situations where you need to be the initiator, then you take this, and you're not really happy that you have to take that, but that's what you have to do. But don't take Crippling Slash that often, because it's not actually that useful. Conversely, Lethal Slash, I find, gets undervalued. Lethal Slash, I say, should be your default, because only 6 damage doesn't sound like much. But remember the way recovery health works in Battlerite. The more damage an ability does, the more valuable an additional point of damage is on top of it, because it's more likely that that additional point is bursting their true health, and not just their recovery health, right? Bursting through recovery health. So Crescent Strike going from 22 to 28 is a big deal, because those 6 points are likely lowering their maximum hit points. And then Debilitating, when it's strong, it's really strong, right? So if there's a situation where the opponent does 2 melees and they're trying to force fights on you, or they're trying to force fights on your ally, but because of Sunwell you can reliably get to your ally, turning the weaken from 2 seconds to 2.5 seconds to 3.5 seconds 3.5 seconds is a long, long time. Look how long this training dummy is weakened. Bump, 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 bump. Yeah, imagine all that time he's doing 60% less damage, not even 50. Like, just, it's outrageous. As long as you land that, I mean, you can, like, trigger Shifu's counter or whatever. It doesn't matter. They can't hurt you. You can just sit there and wail away at them or heal your friends or do whatever you want. And crucially, like, if you screw up, like I said, it's easy to dogpile Sirius if he misses his counter. Well, you do a counter, and then you space away, but they're chasing you. If you land that weaken, by the time the weaken's over, your counter's, like, pretty much up, right? 9 seconds, you wasted a few of them, spacing away and making them follow you. Like, yeah. So if there's a lot of pressure coming to you, definitely take debilitating, because that extra second of weaken is so clutch. But if you're not particularly in one of those high-stress situations, then default to lethal. Save crippling for those times when you find yourself like chasing opponents a lot, trying to desperately land prismatics for the snares and stuff like that. That's what it's for, is when you have to primary engage. Which is, again, Sirius is very bad at. So that's why you're hoping to not be in these situations often. But they do happen with people like Taya. Tier 4. Tier 4 is the most boring. Radiance tends to be my default because, 6 health and your allies healed. It's just, flat value. You don't need to do anything special to take advantage of. It kind of works itself. Moonstone, it's like, take it if you took Lunatic again. Because the nature of Lunar Strike is such that it's very matchup dependent how useful it is. You just sort of pile on the Battlerites on top of it. Like, if this is a matchup where I'm landing a lot of Lunar Strikes, then I'll take Moonstone. But even then, it needs to be a situation where you're kind of like playing the long game, right? Because this just gives you more frequent ones if you're doing lots of right-clicking. But if you're in like a fast and furious melee, then this is still not even that useful. Because maybe you're not getting so many chances to heal, because you're just kind of in these really intense quick fights. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Sorrow Cycle. This is I'm in the 2v1s again. Kind of like Sunscreen, where it's just like, my ally is not that good. I think they're going to die fast, but I think I can carry even after they die. Or just we're splitting into 1v1s, and I'm just trying to win my 1v1 faster than my ally dies in theirs. Maybe because my enemy is good at forcing 1v1s, but I'm just trying to win my half. Sorry, I know I'm speaking towards 2's queue because I think that, again, if you're trying to grind, 2 is better. In 3v3, I should clarify that Moonstone becomes a little bit better because you're more likely to be in that sort of mid-range situation where you are petrifying. Petrify is just a little bit better in 3v3 because they're more likely to catch 2 people. And consequently, Saros is a little bit less useful because weakening half the enemies significantly lowers the enemy's damage. Weakening one of the 3 enemies means that if you blow your counter and weaken one guy, the other 2 can still probably burst you really quickly. Sorry, I'm using guys as a gender pronoun. That's wrong with me. But, yeah. So, but in the 2v2, Saros is kind of like I'm the best player of everybody here, and I want to win. It's also worth noting, superficially, it seems like Sorrow Cycle and Celestial Cycle are good for the same situations, where you want to be doing lots of these combos where you get one charged weapon, and even without proccing counter, you're going to get another one shortly thereafter. But they actually kind of have an anti-synergy with another, because this makes your weapon recharge by 50%, but if you have Sorrow Cycle, then 50% is less time in seconds. So Celestial Cycle saves you 4 seconds of weapon charge, but if you also have Sorrow Cycle, then it's only saving you 2.8 seconds of weapon charge, because it would have charged faster on its own anyway. So generally you shouldn't take both of these together, because they kind of accomplish similar things, but they actually infringe upon each other and make each other worse. So something to keep in mind. Finally, Tier 5, I think this is the only easy one. You should almost never take Sunstrike, because it does this 12 damage little knockback, and look how little range it is. This didn't even trigger it, I've got to go like here. Yeah, the knockback is pretty significant, but here's the thing. If someone is getting hit by this Sunstrike knockback, you're probably doing a bad ult to begin with, because you shouldn't be using it on the forward, because like I said, remember, you want to be hitting people in that kind of creamy mid-range. So doing it in melee range, the opponent is still close enough to you that they can probably outturn you, right? So you're using it because like there's one enemy in front of you really want to get, you're trying to get a guy off you from behind. But like, if that guy's that close to you behind you, just don't do the beam right then. Just try to set up for a better beam in a few seconds. Whereas the snare, because like I said, the whole point of the maximal beam damage is sort of doing it at a range close enough they can't walk straight backwards, but far enough that your beam can turn as fast as they can get out. Well, this makes it a lot more forgiving because they can get out a lot slower. So you should almost always take gravity. Save Sunstrike for like specifically, there's 2 enemies who are bursting me in these really high octane situations, and they're always coming from separate sides, but I need the beam for whatever reason. Then sure. I've taken Sunstrike maybe like twice in my like 400 odd games of Sirius. It was good in those 2 times. You should know. That's what I'll say. You should know if you want Sunstrike, because you should have had that exact situation, that 2 people were beaming down on you, and beam was your best option, but it really sucked having one of them hit you while the other ran away. But generally speaking, if you're in a situation where you can use Sunstrike, you shouldn't be beaming at all. You should be repositioning before you do it, because it's fine to sit on beam a few seconds because it's so powerful when you do it correctly. So I'm going to kind of encapsulate everything I just said about the individual Battlerites by showing you a few of the common builds that I find myself in. So I would say my very most common singular Battlerite build ends up being this. A sort of respectful mid-range. My ally is melee, so I'm going to be giving them lots of sunbaths to keep them healthy. I'm going to be chasing after them with sun wells. This is just the kind of the good default attack. Radiance is just solid value, and then, like I said, gravity is going to feature on all of these. So if you're looking for a single default, I can't adapt to situations, I really just want one thing to put in front of me, I guess put this one in front of you. But like I said, you're really doing yourself a disservice because Sirius' strength is how much he can flex his Battlerites to the situation. So now we're going to do another situation, which is the opponent is double melee, they're very strong, and they're just barreling down on you in fights, and oh god, I'm so scared. Well then, that looks a little bit like this, right? You say, if I'm the one getting targeted, then I'm taking Sorrow Cycle to defend myself. I'm taking Sunbath because I can do that really cool trick where I do like this. But I'm taking Sunscreen. This is kind of the more selfish choice to keep myself alive. Debilitating is clutch for that matchup. Sorrow gives me debilitates faster. And remember, your weapon charges over 8 seconds. With Sorrow Cycle, it's 30%, which is what, like 6-ish seconds? When Weaken is over, that's more than half the weapon charge already back, even if you don't land counters. So this is kind of the self-defense build for Sirius, with a slight adaptation where if they're kind of really, like, they're 2 people who are zerging really hard, but sometimes they're zerging your friend and sometimes they're getting you, and your friend is melee, still take the Sunwell to heal your friend and then weaken the enemies as they go for your friend. Whereas if they're really, like, if they're doing a no healer thing where you just need to kind of outlive them, but their range, that looks a bit more like this. Or maybe this, depending on what kind of range. This is the self-defense build where, actually it's kind of 2 builds. This is both, like, self-defense against spike range. It's really rare that, like, you're running into, like, hard to even imagine. Like, there's, like, a Jumong Jade comp. That's when I might kind of run this weird-looking Battlerite thing. But very often take Radiance, because a lot of times against double range, by the time you can get in range of them, your Crescent Strike is already charged because it takes so much setup to get into range of the enemy. So Sorrow Cycle is a lot less useful if all your enemies are range. So even if they're going for me over my ally, I'll still take Radiance because they'll probably hit my ally at some point, right? And then I'll have Radiance available. So that's one thing this is good for. Another thing this is good for is this is the everyone else, allies and enemies included, are way worse than me build. If you're getting counters all the time, like landing an Illumination Sunscreen counter is actually insane because you heal your allies for 12, you shield yourself for 12, you land your left click immediately, and that is coming in at what, like 26 damage, right? So you did 26 to your opponent, and now they need to do 24 to you just to do 0 to you through your shield because they're weakened, right? And you still have that empowerment to hit them with left clicks that will still do like 10 damage instead of 8 because of the illumination charge. Or heal yourself with that 20%. Or maybe do this. So, yeah, if you're consistently landing counters, and you just need to kind of style upon your enemies, then this is kind of that build. Another thing this build is good for is, again, those Pearl Rygon comps where you need to do lots of damage all at once to get through recovery health. So there's a lot of times this build can kind of have value, but you should think of this as kind of the more fight man's build. That's not really about supporting, it's about individually outplaying everybody. Whereas this is the kind of the much more common working with your allies. You take one of these, playing Sirius from a more neutral position. Yeah, and then those situations where you need to be the primary engage. So everyone in the game is ranged but you. You're really unhappy. This is the worst situation for you, but you make the best of it. You take illumination, just because that's what you take in matches that are really about range combat, unless that happens to be range combat where you can still land a lot of petrifies. But a lot of times, if the combat is at range, it's really hard to land petrifies because no one is doing that first CC to slow them down. So yeah, you take illumination, then you take celestial, because of how important it is to chase people down and try to root them. And then, like I said, by the time 8 seconds are up, your weapon has recharged again. So a lot of times you'll just kind of take Radiance if they're going for your ally, Moonstone if you can land petrifies. Sometimes you take Saros anyway, just to say, like, yes, these anti-synergize, but it still gives me the most possible release in a short amount of time because I can do this, right? Where by the time I do this, the refund makes it basically free. Because it's like... So yeah. So I hope that was informative. And I hope that gets you on the Sirius train because he really is a good guy to get rating with. Just keep in mind that you do need to play him differently in various situations, so keep your mind open to that, and make sure you're flexing your battle rights according to the situation, and you will find success. My cats went back to sleep.